has been the author of 3 books, most notably the namesake of this show, Be Iconic. Dr. Harry has been delivering a healthy dose of truth serum to women across the country, and she today is going to deliver that same truth serum to all of you. Welcome, Dr. Harry.
Hi, Lisa.
So today we're talking a little bit about mental health, and it's all about negativity. And so negativity, like colds, we all know, are contagious. But the reality of it is when we see someone with a cold, or these days, when we see someone cough, we know how to distance ourselves and protect ourselves. But what are some of the things when you think about negativity and the fact that negativity is contagious that you think about and try to encourage women to separate themselves and really recognize, right, what's going on?
Right. So here's the thing we've all been around individuals and situations that when we leave that situation or that conversation, we feel horrible. We either feel extremely tired or we feel extremely overwhelmed. We can be really fatigued or we feel really bad about ourselves. So something in that interaction was not a positive interaction for you. So something in that interaction kind of leaked out onto you. And I think that's what we're talking about here when we say negativity is contagious. It's really important that because we already have our challenges with our own thoughts, right? So that's really important. And our thoughts can be influenced and is oftentimes influenced by our surroundings. And so it can be influenced by how we grew up, what we heard when we were growing up. Oftentimes you'll find yourself repeating or thinking things that you heard while you were growing up, and all of it ultimately can have an impact on how you feel about yourself, which is really, really important. And you hear me talk a lot about acceptance, self-acceptance and self-love, and negativity can actually be counterproductive when we're trying to accomplish that.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like none of us are surprised, but we still want to be, that compassionate ear. And so negative people, for most part, almost love to kind of bring other people to where they are because there is a comfort in that. It can sometimes seem like, that the only thing that they enjoy doing is talking about things over and over again. So what should you do when faced with a negative friend or coworker, family member, or colleague that you've kind of offered that listening ear, and then you realize the bad day is happening over and over and over again?
So it's important when you're in that situation and you know that this person tends to focus on negative things or complain a lot. Ultimately, I do a couple of things with that. I stop and say, well, that's interesting because I've heard you speak about that before, but what do you think the solution to that is? Because oftentimes solutions help us to feel better. To me, if you're constantly complaining, that's complaining. That's not problem solving. So it doesn't mean that things are not the way we want them to be, but oftentimes if we're talking about that, then we have to start thinking, great, this is an issue, but how do we start correcting it? So oftentimes I would stop and say, okay, so we've talked about this before. What do you think some of the solutions are? And that kind of gives you an idea if this person is ever going to start thinking solutions or start thinking, how do I resolve this issue? Or start thinking, do I need to leave this issue? You know what I mean? So then it gives you an idea. The other thing that I might do, honestly, is I say, oh, well, that's interesting, but I just remembered I have a previous engagement that I really need to attend to, or someplace I have to go. And you really do not have to be in a conversation that's not going anywhere, for lack of a better terminology. If you're in a conversation that you feel yourself continually either feeling more negative or feeling that someone is, the energy is literally leaving you minute by minute, that's a time to disengage from that conversation and do something else.
You talk a lot about people, specifically women, protecting their space, their mental, physical, just protecting themselves. And so I want to know from you, can people make an unhappy person happy? Is that something that an individual can do?
No. Here's the thing. You are not able to make somebody else happy. You're able to augment their joy. You're able to support them. You're able to inspire them. You might be able to motivate them. But ultimately, that place of feeling that you are enough and that your life is enough and feeling that you have enough right now to kind of go to the next step that you need to, that place of being satisfied with yourself comes from you. And so ultimately, that what I have found out, Lisa, is that very seldom has to do with finances. Finances certainly can support your happiness, but it very seldom can change that person who you are. So there are definitely people who have a lot of things, but ultimately there's a dissatisfaction in that person. So ultimately, it is not our responsibility to make others happy. What we can do is that we can be supportive and we can be inspiring, but we're not going to be able to change someone's mindset. The person that can change your mindset is you.
So let's unpack this a little bit, because I've heard you've written about it, you've talked about it. When we think about the reason that individuals can make someone else unhappy, it has to do with an insecurity on the other person's part. And what is the, when you think about the issue with someone else blowing out their candle to make someone else's shine brighter? So almost retreating so that someone else who's negative or looks at situations a different way, so they feel good about themselves. What does that do to the person that is starting to kind of retreat instead of continuing to let their light shine?
It's important to be who you are. In retreating or dimming your light does not make anybody else's light shine any brighter. It just makes yours less, and it makes you feel less. It makes you retreat, and it makes your issues come up, and it tends to make you more negative, and then you start feeling not enough, and that does not make the world a better place, actually. So what you are there to give to the world, because we all have something can contribute, and we all contribute in our own way. So my contribution is not going to look like your contribution, but it doesn't mean that anyone is more important. For example, the sun and the moon, no one is more important. So your contribution is different. And so sometimes we feel that we need to, because we don't want to step on toes, or we don't want to rock the boat, or I'm trying to hear all of the phrases, or we don't want to make somebody else feel bad, or all of these things. If you're not doing things with the intention of making someone else feel bad, if you're doing things with just the intention of being who you are and allowing who you are to come through, and allowing that special light that each of us have on the inside to kind of shine through, then that is your job. That's what you're here for. And so because you retreat won't make that person find their light any sooner. In fact, I think you might be doing them a disservice, and you're certainly not allowing the world to enjoy who you are.
I think that's the most difficult part about relationships, right? Even friendships, when especially women, when we come together, you can recognize when someone else is saying, hey, I want to be like that, or I want to be like that person, or I look at what they do and I want to mimic that. And what people don't understand is when they're doing that, everyone can see when that's not naturally part of you, or if you're just trying to duplicate who somebody else is. And ultimately, to your point, that's always going to end in unhappiness, right? Because either you're dimming your light or you're trying to shine a light that isn't yours. And so the relationship doesn't necessarily have that cohesive kind of overlap where everybody's benefiting from each other's positive attributes. Right. How do you feel someone could set boundaries? So what's the best way to set boundaries?
Well, the best way to set boundaries is really recognizing what feels good for you. Okay. And recognizing your when it feels that you've had enough and what particular situation that is, and identifying things and circumstances and people that don't really feel very nourishing to you, and being okay establishing time to say, you know what, right now at this point in time I cannot take on this particular responsibility, of being very comfortable saying no. You don't necessarily owe anyone a long explanation as to why you can't do something. So ultimately, if we're trying to people please, I think is the term I like the most. If you're trying to make everybody else happy, we've already talked about that's not really a possible task. So you're taking on an impossibility. So there's no way you're going to make everybody happy. And so ultimately, if your goal is to try to do that, then you failed immediately. So ultimately, what you want to do is find out what makes you happy, what makes your soul sing. And when you do that, and then you start interacting with others from that place, they see that light in you. So oftentimes we can try on different personas and personalities, and we might see somebody that we admire. We might say, let me try what they're doing and see if it feels right for me. And it doesn't necessarily don't, of course, you're not going to spend your whole time just kind of mimicking what they are, but oftentimes we find ourselves trying different things on to see how they fit. And ultimately, if we're coming from a place of knowing who we are and being comfortable with how things feel, we will find that it may not feel quite comfortable. So we may have to adjust it here and there until it becomes our own unique self. Because I remember I've heard Oprah in an interview once talking about how early in her career she really worked on sounding and being like Barbara Walters. Again, it's trying on the personality to see if it fits, because there's somebody that she admired, obviously, and somebody that she connected to. But I think what I'm pointing out is that you connect to that person because you're sensing the genuineness of that person. And so you're thinking, wow, I want to be like that. And so that's fine. But ultimately, that you want to be like is finding your own genuine. So she found her own way of presenting and communicating. So of course, there are many of us out there who've looked at Oprah and thought, I want to be like that. But ultimately, again, what I realized is that we're just connecting to that person, just being who they are, and they're being who they are in such a way that they're making other people feel better, and they're giving other people permission to be who they are. And so there's nothing like that.
We always talk about, women as we transition through different stages in life. A lot of women get to, and this is a lot of, especially your third book, about recognizing and giving yourself the room to figure out who you are outside of all the things that you defined as your things that you had to do, right? And so a lot of women are getting to that point at 35, 40, where you kind of were a mom and a wife and you're a career woman, but you may have been in a career that you did because you were good at it, but it may not have given you that inspiration to walk in that light. How can someone, so there's two parts to this question. We talk about pivoting from the standpoint of just recognizing when you need to make that shift and really figure out what's next for you. But also recognizing when a situation has become too much, right? And so where you need to. So how can someone who sees themselves going down the wrong path, how can they then pivot? What would you recommend?
So recognize and reset. Computers have a reset button. Yeah. And ultimately mine is just like turning it off and turning it back on again. But many things have a reset button. So it's ultimately recognizing it. And so that's what getting to know yourself is about. Getting to sit with those uncomfortable feelings because they're telling you something. They're either telling you something in your environment that doesn't match with who you are, or they're telling you some thoughts that maybe you're thinking that doesn't match with who you are deep inside. So it's recognizing that and then doing things to reset. And by that, I mean, so if you're identifying a situation that's not supportive to you, or a person that's not supportive to you, and you recognize that, you're like, oh, I feel like I'm being drained, I'm feeling particularly tired, then you find a way to extricate yourself from that situation. And again, and no one is saying that you have to be rude or unpleasant or anything like that. You just have to say, excuse me, I think I have somewhere else, to go right now. I have something else that I need to be doing. You wouldn't say I have something else I'd rather be doing. Yes, there's something, I have something else that I need to be doing. So it's recognizing it and reset it. If the thought is coming from you, is replacing it, recognizing that thought, recognizing that it's not making you feel your best self, recognizing that that thought is probably not true, because any thought that's like, oh, this always does this, or I'm always this, or I'm never like this, those thoughts are usually not true. So ultimately, it's recognizing those thoughts, recognizing that they're not true, and replacing them with something that feels more true to you and is also more encouraging to you. So instead of saying, I always make the wrong choice with foods, you know, if you kind of indulge in that chocolate cake that you had, and now you're feeling horrible and you start beating up on yourself, and it's like, oh, I always do this and always do that. You say, no, what you do is you stop and say, you know, I did have that piece of cake. Tomorrow I will start doing other things. I will get back on my health journey. This was just something to treat myself. It doesn't make me a bad person. I think ultimately we always think that things make us a bad person. It makes us human, is what it does. And so this idea of being perfect all the time and making perfect choices, I don't even know what that is, because what is a perfect choice? A perfect choice is only done in retrospect. When we look back at it and we think that that was the perfect outcome, or that's the outcome that should have happened. So there are no perfect choices. So ultimately, you want to make a choice that doesn't make you feel like you're beating up on yourself, or that you're doing things to not encourage yourself.
When we talk about negativity as contagious, I think we'd be remiss to kind of bring this full circle and talk a little bit about the images that women see on TV, that they see in magazines. It's not just the person that you can touch, it's all of the individuals that you can't touch across social media and Instagram, where everything is perfectly coiffed, right? And people only give you the best of what is going on in their lives. And so you mentioned in Be Iconic, and I know in Be Your Own Icon, your Facebook group, where your goal is to allow women to naturally evolve into these spaces and aging gracefully and on their own terms. And so what are some tips that you give about being able to do that? And because the negativity doesn't have to be someone that you are around every day. It's all of these messages that come in and tell you you're too old to change careers. You should age out of working in corporate America at 45, shouldn't have gray hair, all of those things that kind of come in. What are some tips that you give women about being able to kind of break through that ceiling, which is a different type of ceiling, and kind of quell all of the negative chatter?
Well, the first thing I say is that when these images are coming in and trying to tell you're too old, you're not enough, you don't know enough, and all of these images coming in, just say, no, thank you, I'm good. So ultimately, what you want to do is recognize, like you said, Lisa, that these images are just snippets of things that you're seeing, and some of them may be perfectly airbrushed here, and they're just showing you a little snippet of things. This is not, so ultimately it is not reality, right? And so what I've noticed on some of the social media pages now that I appreciate is that women are showing up as who they are. And I love it. And as my daughter would say, I'm here for it. Because I see now like a lot of women are just showing up. So you know what? I have a role here. This is not perfectly done here. I kind of messed up here. And I'm thinking, thank God, because we are not all that. Do we all have moments in our lives where everything looks perfect? You're like, oh, man, I did that perfectly. Yeah. Like I would bake a cake or something. And I was like, man, it's like, I am just a master baker. But that is that one. So I take that photo and I put it on whatever social media, and everybody goes, oh my God, she's so amazing. No, that is a one-time thing that just happened perfectly, that takes a beautiful picture. Any other day you catch me trying to bake something, it looks all lumpy and crooked and all of that other sort of stuff. So ultimately, it's just recognizing that these are just snippets that are shown to you, and you can choose to embrace them, or you can choose to say, well, that's an interest. And it's like appreciating art. If it's something that you go, oh, I appreciate a beautiful piece, a beautiful painting. I don't want to be that painting. I'm just appreciating it in the moment for what it is. And if you look at that and say, oh, I appreciate that in the moment for what it is, but it has nothing to do with me. It doesn't mean that I am less. It doesn't mean any of that. And so ultimately, when you start hearing the message that you're too old to do something, says who? Like, unless you say that to yourself and you start incorporating that and acting like that, that's not a valid statement at all. So ultimately, it's incumbent on us to kind of change that and to let people know that that is no longer what we want to see. That is no longer what we want to embrace. And so I start seeing some changes, on covers of magazines and so on. And I hope it stays up, because there are people that look very different, and they're all beautiful for me, and they all have something that's super unique, and I want to appreciate all of it. So ultimately, it's up to, if we start consuming those things and incorporating those things, then they have to change, and we have to start generating what we want to see. As Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see. We have to start being the change that we want to see.
Be the change. That's a perfect segue into the last part of the show. You are aging backwards, and for those people that can see from the standpoint of, you just exude this energy, but you also just double down on making sure that you're taking care of yourself. And so, what is the last tidbit, as you take us out, to women about just doing that check-in, and all of the other things will level set, right? Like you'll start to see that you're bringing in more positive people and more positive thoughts into your life.
Absolutely. And I think you said it perfectly, Lisa. It's like double down on taking care of yourself, because that is really the most important thing. And that is the way that we show up as our best self. That is the way that we attract into our lives people that make us feel better. That is the way that we identify people who don't. And that is the way we give ourselves permission to let go of those things that don't make us feel good, and not feel guilty about it. When we really double down on taking care of ourselves, and we say, listen, I'm going to be the type of woman that just like shows up for me, because when I show up for me, I show up for other people in a better way. So I love what you said. I couldn't phrase it any better. Double down on taking care of yourself.
I love it. Dr. Harry, you are such an inspiration, and I know that everyone watches every week is just watching the evolution of you step it up every time. So thank you so much for your truth serum today. And I just want to let everyone know, if you want to find out more information about how you can work with Dr. Harry one-on-one, and get this type of information specific to what's going on with you, you can reach out to www.drharrymd.com, and you can set up a telehealth appointment, one-on-one appointment. You can also join her Facebook group, Be Your Own Icon, where you'll get healthy tips, accountability. You'll get some more personal interaction with both the group members and also Dr. Harry. Is such a great group. Right now, it's still open. So I encourage you guys to jump on over to that and join today. And then, hey, we're going to be here, same place, same time next week. But until then, I'm going to ask you guys to live, laugh, love, and be iconic. Until next week. Thanks, Dr. Harry. We'll see you.
Bye-bye.